The snow came down sideways that morning, a wild, whispering hush that swallowed all sound. The depot stood alone at the edge of the world, wood groaning under the weight of white silence. Wind threaded itself through every crack in the platform, and only the coal stove inside the station office made any stand against it. Tahlequah Blackhorse sat on the bench outside, unmoving beneath his buffalo hide coat. Snow gathered along the folds of his long black hair, but he didn't brush it away. His breath plumed slow in the air like smoke from a distant fire. He was a mountain of a man, quiet as iron gone cold, and the townsfolk gave him room even when they didn't say why. Some called him the Apache Ghost. Others, the Lost Rider. But to himself, he was just a man who'd quit speaking more than needed after the war took his brothers and the town took his pride. The door creaked open. A little girl stepped out, too small for the wind that pushed against her. She wore no coat, only a shawl knotted awkwardly over a thin calico dress. Snow bit at her bare knees, but she didn't flinch. She had copper curls matted to her cheeks and eyes too knowing for 5 years old. She stood a moment, studying him like one might study a broken fence, wondering if it would hold. Then, she whispered, "Sir, my mama, her name's Helena, she's gonna have a baby. She needs somewhere warm." He didn't blink. Didn't move. Snow piled on his shoulders like time itself. "She says she can't walk anymore," the girl went on. Her voice cracked. "She said maybe you wouldn't mind." Tahlequah turned his head slowly toward the station. In the glass, barely visible through the swirling frost, stood a woman, thin, pale, her hands trembling on her belly. Her dress was wet at the hem. Her face was hollowed by shame and weather in too many nights alone. Her eyes never met his. He looked back at the girl. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "I'm 5. He stood. Towered. And without a word, he crossed the platform, opened the depot door, and swept the woman into his arms. No protest came from her. She weighed little, and he felt the sharp ridge of her spine even through her clothes. She clutched his coat weakly, ashamed of needing what she'd asked for. Judah Penrose, the station master, stepped out of his office and froze. "Now hold on." Tahlequah didn't stop walking. His voice came low and even, like water sliding over stone. The girl asked. Judah huffed. "She's not your kind. She's trouble, Qua. You let her in, and you'll be the one who pays." Qua paused just long enough to look at him. The station master faltered. He always did when the giant went still like that, like some old grizzly deciding whether to maul or move on. Tahlequah walked past him without another word. His horse waited beyond the platform, steam curling from its nostrils. He mounted with Helena still in his arms, balanced her in front, and reached down for the girl. Emma scrambled up behind, arms wrapping tight around his waist. The storm closed behind them as they disappeared into the white. It was a long ride through the pines. The wind screamed against the trees, but inside the cabin, when they reached it, was only silence. Tahlequah laid Helena down on his own bed. The fire was already lit, logs crackling. He wrapped her in furs, tucked a warm rag beneath her neck, and left a tin cup of water on the stool beside her. Then he turned and knelt to pull off Emma's wet shoes. The child didn't speak. She only stared at the man's weathered hands, large enough to crush but gentle enough not to wake her mother. She let him take off her shawl, replace it with a woolen blanket, and lead her to the hearth where a pallet waited. The room smelled of cedar and smoke and bare fat. It was not a home that expected company. But it became one in that moment, without any words to mark it. Outside, the storm kept its furious vigil. Helena stirred, half awake. "Why are you helping us?" Tahlequah poured broth into a tin bowl and said nothing. He carried it to her, one hand beneath it so it wouldn't shake. She didn't take it. Her lips trembled. "You don't know what I've done." He watched her for a long breath. Then he set the bowl on the stool and returned to the fire. He didn't press her. Didn't judge her. That night, the wind battered the shutters and howled down the chimney like something grieving. But inside, the cabin was still. Emma fell asleep curled around the carved wooden horse she found near the hearth. Tahlequah remained seated on the floor, back against the wall, his eyes half-lidded. He didn't sleep. Just listened to the soft sounds of a woman breathing through pain and a child dreaming without fear for the first time in months. When dawn came, it came slow and pink behind the trees. The snow hadn't stopped. The world was still blanketed in white silence. Helena turned toward the wall. She hadn't eaten the broth. She hadn't moved much at all. But when she opened her eyes and saw Emma tucked beside the hearth warm, safe, she let out a breath that shook. Then she whispered to herself, barely audible, "We're still here." She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. The man with long black hair and the eyes of a lost river simply stood, lifted another log, and fed the fire without a word. And somewhere, beneath the frozen hush of pine and snow, a new story had begun. The wind had quieted by morning, but the hush that lingered wasn't peace, it was something older, heavier. It filled the cabin like a prayer too sacred to speak aloud. Helena woke slowly. Pain throbbed low in her back, but the fire still burned and the room was warm. Her eyes traveled to the pallet near the hearth where Emma lay, one arm cradling the wooden horse, cheeks flushed with warmth. Her daughter hadn't looked that peaceful in months. Helena turned her head, wincing, and found a bowl beside her bed. Broth, still warm. She stared at it, unsure if she should reach. Every kindness pressed against a bruise she didn't know she had. She touched the bowl anyway. Her hand shook as she brought it to her lips. The cabin was empty but for them. She listened, no sound of boots, no grumble of a man nearby. Just crackling logs, the hum of winter pressing at the walls, and somewhere in the trees, a mourning dove calling like a widow. She set the bowl down and tried to sit up. Her body protested, her dignity already threadbare. The door creaked softly. Tahlequah stepped inside, carrying a pail of snow for melting. His coat was dusted white, shoulders broad and still. He didn't look surprised to find her awake. His eyes flicked to the bowl, half empty, and then to her face. She cleared her throat. "You're kind." He didn't answer. She looked down, shamed by her own words. "I know you don't want thanks. But I need to say it." Still, he said nothing. Only moved toward the hearth, poured the snow into the iron kettle, and fed the fire. "Most folks would have left us there," she said. Her voice was hoarse, not from illness but from being used in places where no one listened. Qua's voice, when it came, was low as a river under ice. "Most folks ain't got your child's eyes on them." Helena blinked. He turned toward her then, finally facing her with a gaze that made her feel seen and unseen at once. "She believed in you when she asked me. That's all I needed." Helena swallowed hard. "You don't know what I've done." He picked up a ladle, stirred the melting snow. "I don't need to." That silenced her better than judgment would have. She looked away, clutching the edge of the blanket. When Emma stirred, it was with a yawn and a sleepy smile. "Mama, he made me tea last night. It was funny tea, tasted like pine and honey." Helena smoothed her daughter's curls, then glanced at Tahlequah. "Thank you." He nodded once, then went to the door. "I'll bring in more wood." When the door shut behind him, Helena exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the station. She touched her belly, where the baby shifted slow beneath her skin, and whispered, "Not yet. Stay a little longer." Outside, Qua chopped wood, each strike echoing through the still trees. He didn't swing like a man trying to work off rage. His movements were controlled, purposeful. Quiet mercy lived in how he split kindling like it mattered not to waste even the wood. Helena watched through the window. He could have been a monster, she thought. He could have demanded something, could have turned them in, could have left her to bleed in the snow. Instead, he was a fire that didn't speak but warmed just the same. When he returned, he carried eggs and snow-covered herbs. Helena tried to rise to help, but he stilled her with one look and a quiet, "Rest." She obeyed, more from the weight of his gentleness than command. Later that day, she forced herself to her feet. She made it to the wash basin and rinsed her face, flinching at her reflection in the metal, bruised lips, sallow skin, eyes hollowed from shame. She scrubbed anyway, as if scrubbing could wipe away the past. She caught sight of Emma braiding the horse's mane with string. The child hadn't asked once about where they were going next. Perhaps she sensed it already, that they had arrived somewhere they weren't meant to leave too quickly. Helena found a broom in the corner and began sweeping. When Qua came back in, he paused at the door. She didn't stop. "I can't just lie there while you do everything," she said without turning. "I don't mind," he said. "Well, I do." A beat of silence passed. Then, without a word, he stepped around her and began fixing the hinge on the cupboard door. They worked in tandem, never speaking again, but the silence between them changed shape. It became breathable. That night, they shared stew. Helena fed Emma first, then herself, then awkwardly offered Qua his bowl. He accepted it with a nod and sat across the fire. Not too close. Not too far. Emma curled up in a fur blanket with her carved horse and whispered, "Is he an angel, Mama?" Helena looked at the man with soot-streaked hands and sad eyes. "No, baby," she said gently. "He's just someone who didn't walk away." The next morning, the knock came. Judah Penrose stood outside the cabin, shoulders tight with cold and something crueler. "I came to check if you'd taken her," he said to Qua, not bothering to acknowledge Helena. "Whole town's talkin'. You harbor a woman like that." "Like what?" Helena stepped forward, hand protectively on her belly. Judah snorted. "You think folks forgot you came through once before? Got caught up with that traveling preacher. Bastard child, no husband, no name. Now you're back?" Qua stepped between them, silent. Judah's eyes narrowed. "You always did side with the wrong kind. First them settlers ran you off, now you're playing house with this one?" Qua didn't move. His silence, like always, grew heavier than any threat. Judah scoffed. "Town won't welcome either of you." "Then don't speak for it," Helena said. Her voice was shaking, but it stood. Judah stared at her like she was a fire too small to fear, but too stubborn to stamp out. "Suit yourselves," he said. "But don't come begging when they shut their doors." He left in a flurry of frost. Qua shut the door and stood with his hand on the latch a long while. "I'm sorry," Helena whispered. "I didn't mean to bring trouble." He shook his head once. They'd have found something to hate either way. She crossed the room slowly and reached for the bowl to wash. Her fingers brushed his rough, calloused hands against her own weathered ones. He didn't pull away. That night, they said nothing. But he left a bundle of dried herbs by her bedside, one she recognized from her childhood, lavender and mullein and yarrow. She clutched them to her chest and cried quietly where no one could see. Outside, the snow fell again. Inside, a woman who thought she was ruined began to believe she could still be something whole. And the man who had lived in silence for years didn't ask her to prove herself. He simply kept the fire going. The snow deepened in the coming days, burying fences and paths until the world beyond the cabin vanished. The pines stood like cathedral spires, their silence broken only by the hiss of snow melting on fire-warmed windows. The storm no longer screamed, it whispered now, patient and lingering, as though it too waited for something to be born. Inside the cabin, time softened. Not fast, not loud, but gently, like the way bread rises in quiet or how a bruise fades. Helena began to move without flinching. She brushed her own hair, slowly. She swept the floor without apology. She took pride in the soup she made, even when it was just roots and bone. Her body ached, but she held her head higher each day. No one told her to. It came from within. Tahlequah didn't speak much. But he always looked. When she hung her washed clothes to dry, he fixed the bent nail without comment. When she coughed, he passed her warm water before she asked. When she took to sitting by the fire at dusk, he carved quietly near her, smoothing cedar into shape with his knife. It was Emma who made him smile first. She tiptoed up behind him one morning, placed 2 braids in his thick black hair, and declared him a proper gentleman. He didn't turn around. Didn't scold. He simply reached back, tied them with a strip of leather, and went on carving. Helena laughed, a sound like cracking ice. She covered her mouth, startled. He looked up. Their eyes met across the fire. And for one breathless moment, the world felt warm again. Later that night, Emma climbed into Helena's lap and asked, "Mama, do you think he'll let us stay?" Helena paused. Her fingers were braiding the girl's curls, and for a moment, she couldn't move. "I don't know, baby," she said softly. "We're only meant to be guests." Emma frowned. "But he gave me a horse." "That means forever." The little wooden carving sat proudly on the hearth, now with painted eyes and a string mane. Helena pressed a kiss to her daughter's crown, blinking fast. She wanted to believe it too. But Helena May Whitlow had learned, long ago, not to ask too much of mercy. It came when it wanted. And it left without warning. When the storm finally broke, sunlight fell through the trees like grace. Qua hitched up his horse and chopped extra wood, clearing paths that hadn't been walked in days. Helena took her daughter's hand and stepped outside, bracing against the cold. The forest glittered with hoarfrost. 1,000 diamonds hung from pine needles. The world, even in its bleakest season, had remembered how to be beautiful. She sat on a stump and breathed deep. Tahlequah passed by with a load of timber. He paused, looked at her there in the light, hair loose, belly round beneath her dress, the shadow of a smile tugging at her mouth. "You look better," he said. She turned to him, startled. "You think so?" He gave one slow nod and kept walking. She stared after him, heart stammering. It was the first compliment she'd received in years that didn't feel like a lie or a trap. That night, as wind licked around the shutters again, Helena found herself telling Emma a story. Not one from a book. One from before. "Your granddaddy had a fiddle," she whispered, her voice thin in the firelight. "He'd play it under the porch on hot nights. Your papa, he was no good. But once, he danced with me while that fiddle played, and I thought the world had finally turned my way." Emma rested her head on Helena's shoulder. "Did it?" Helena stared into the fire. For a moment. She didn't say what followed: the preacher's shame, her banishment, the way every house closed its door. The night she gave birth alone in a church basement. The way Emma cried not because she was cold, but because Helena couldn't stop shaking. Those weren't stories for little ears. But they lived in Helena's bones. Qua never asked about her past. But she caught him watching her sometimes, as if he saw the shadows and let them be. The next morning, the birds returned. Emma raced outside with her hands full of crumbs. "I'll make friends," she cried. Tahlequah watched her from the porch, a rare smile touching his lips. He leaned on the post, arms crossed, sun catching the edge of his cheekbones. Helena stood beside him, arms wrapped over her belly. "She's strong," he said. "She had to be." He looked at her then, really looked. "So did you." Helena's throat closed up. She nodded, unable to speak. Later, while Emma napped, Helena walked the cabin with restlessness she couldn't shake. The child was safe. The fire was fed. But her heart beat wild. There was something shifting in her, like thaw. She found Qua outside splitting logs. She stepped closer, hesitant. "I can't repay you." He didn't stop working. "I don't have silver. I don't have land. I don't even have a name that means anything anymore." He paused, axe in hand. "You have your child. That's more than most." She studied his face. "Why are you really doing this?" His jaw moved, slow. "Because I know what it is to be left." She flinched. The weight of that truth settled between them like snow falling on fire. He turned away then and resumed chopping. Not out of rudeness, but out of mercy. He gave her space to hold what he'd given. That night, as Helena stitched a hole in her sleeve, the baby moved with sudden urgency. A hard push beneath her ribs, then a sharper one low. She gasped. Qua was across the room, sharpening his blade. He stood immediately. "I think," she winced, setting the needle down, "I think it's starting." He crossed to her with surprising speed. Emma woke at the sound and scrambled to her mother's side. "I'll boil water," he said. "Mama?" Emma's voice shook. Helena forced a smile. "It's all right, baby. It's just time." Her breath came faster. The pain had arrived in earnest. Tahlequah returned with blankets, herbs, and a kettle, setting them all out with an efficiency that belied his quiet nature. "Have you done this before?" Helena panted. He met her eyes. "No. But I'll stay." And stay he did. He held her hand when she cried. He wiped her brow when she nearly gave up. He whispered something in Apache once, soft and reverent. When the pain stole her words, she squeezed his hand so hard her fingers ached. By the time the moon rose over the pines, the child had not yet come. But Helena knew it would be soon. Outside, snow fell gently again, covering the path and hiding the world once more. Inside, where the pines could not see, a woman bore her pain with dignity, and a man who had lost his name long ago bore witness. The fire crackled. Emma lay curled with the wooden horse beside her, watching with wide, trusting eyes. And Helena, through breathless pain, realized something astonishing. She was no longer afraid. The pain came in waves so strong Helena felt she might break open before the baby ever arrived. Sweat glistened on her brow, her hands knotted in the wool blanket beneath her, jaw clenched against another cry. But the storm had passed, and the wind had gone still, as if the entire world outside the cabin held its breath with her. Tahlequah knelt beside her, sleeves rolled to his forearms, eyes steady and calm. He spoke little, only when needed, offering water, shifting her gently, soaking a cloth to cool her face. It was not knowledge that guided his hands, but care. Not obligation, but choice. Emma sat nearby on the pallet, cradling the wooden horse and whispering little prayers. Her small voice trembled as she said them, but she did not look away. "You're doing good," Qua murmured, catching Helena as she pitched forward with another contraction. "Just breathe." She did, ragged, shallow, but enough. "I can't," she rasped. "I don't have the strength left." "You do," he said, without doubt. The next hour blurred. The pain deepened, tightened, until it eclipsed all else. Then, with one last cry that tore the silence in two, the child arrived. A girl, tiny, wet, full of life and wailing. Tahlequah caught her, wrapped her in linen, and handed her to Helena with hands that trembled for the first time. Helena wept quiet, exhausted tears as she held the baby against her chest. "She's perfect," she whispered. "Perfect." Emma tiptoed closer, wide-eyed. "Can I see?" Helena smiled through her tears and nodded. "She's got your nose," Emma declared with pride. Tahlequah rose and moved to the hearth. He fed the fire, stoked it brighter, poured hot water for cleaning. Helena watched him as she cradled her newborn, watched how his back moved like stone carved by weather, how his silence filled the room more completely than any sermon ever could. The door opened sometime near dawn. Martha Crane stood in the threshold, wool cloak dusted with snow, eyes sharp beneath her bonnet. She scanned the room, lips pressed tight, and stepped inside without a word. "Didn't think you'd come," Qua said low. "I heard," she answered simply. "Judah runs his mouth like a river come spring. Said a woman with no husband was giving birth under an Apache's roof." She took off her gloves and moved to Helena. "What's her name?" Martha asked as she examined the baby. Helena hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Snow." "Fitting." The old woman nodded. "She's healthy." "Small, but healthy." "You did just fine." Helena blinked back more tears. "I didn't do it alone." Martha didn't look at Qua, but her voice softened. "I see that." The morning wore on with the scent of pine sap, fire smoke, and fresh linen. Martha helped where she could but said little. She was the kind who judged quietly, but also the kind who stayed when others turned away. After wrapping the baby again, she rose and looked around the room. "You'll have more visitors soon," she warned. "Judah's been stirring things up." "Let them come," Qua said. Helena's hand curled protectively around the baby. They'll want to take her. Take Emma. They'll have to come through me, Martha said. And through him. Helena looked to the door where Qua stood, back straight, still and unshaken. She nodded slowly. Then we'll stay. The words surprised her even as they came out. She could have left once the snow cleared, once she'd regained her strength. She could have gone to another town, tried again, started over. But something in her knew this was where she belonged. Not because she had nowhere else, but because someone had chosen to keep her warm, even when the rest of the world left her cold. Qua looked at her and, for a moment, there was something in his gaze that went deeper than kindness. It wasn't ownership. It wasn't obligation. It was shelter. I'll start adding a wall, he said quietly. You'll need your own space. Helena stared at him. You're building us a room? For the girls. The girls. Not her girls. Not someone else's. The girls. She clutched her newborn tighter and whispered, "Thank you." He gave no reply. Only stepped out into the cold and began clearing snow beside the cabin. Martha smirked as she wrapped her shawl tighter. You picked a strange one. But the good ones always are. I didn't pick him, Helena said, still watching the door. Emma did. They laughed, the old woman and the too young mother. Laughed not out of ease, but out of relief. That night, when Martha left, she did so with a promise to return in a week with bread, supplies, and more news. Helena sat in the rocking chair by the fire, baby Snow swaddled in her arms, Emma asleep at her feet. Qua sat across the room, sharpening a tool, eyes lowered. But she could feel the way his presence wrapped around them. I used to think nobody would ever want me again, she said softly. Not after what I'd been through. He looked up. I thought all I could do was survive. He said nothing. But now I want more than that. He nodded once, like he understood something she hadn't spoken aloud. I'll help with the walls, she added. When I'm strong enough. I know, he said. The silence after was comfortable. The fire crackled. Outside, snow fell again, not in violence, but with quiet purpose. Covering the world like a soft blanket. Inside the cabin, 3 souls breathed as one. A woman who chose to stay, a man who'd never asked her to, and a newborn girl who had no idea that her name had already stitched a broken family back together. And somewhere beyond the trees, the town whispered. But the cabin stayed warm. The snow had begun to melt come mid-March, retreating in patches beneath the pines. The path from the cabin to the main trail cut like a dark scar through the thawing woods. Birds had returned, shy at first, then bold, fluttering around the eaves where Emma left crumbs each morning. Beneath the stillness, the world was stirring again. Inside the cabin, the days passed not in peace, but in purpose. Helena had healed enough to walk without pain. Baby Snow, swaddled and warm, slept beside the hearth in a handmade cradle Qua carved from split pine. Helena had sewn a quilt for it, stitched with crooked stars and steady hope. Every morning, Qua added a new beam to the small lean-to beside the cabin. He never explained what it would be, not at first. But Helena knew. It was space for them. For staying. Still, the hush between them hadn't yet broken. He watched her with quiet attentiveness. When she moved too fast, he'd leave a chair nearby. When she missed supper, a bowl waited for her by the fire. He never asked questions. He just kept building. Helena often caught herself reaching for things before he needed them. She folded his coat one day and left a sprig of pine in the pocket. She didn't know why, only that it felt right, and that she wanted to leave something behind in his world. Then came the knock. It was late afternoon, sky still gray with snow clouds not yet emptied. Qua opened the door slow, shoulders already tense. Judah Penrose stood outside with 2 other men, deputy irons on their belts, anger hot in their breath. You've harbored a woman unwed, birthing children without claim, Judah said flatly. And the town's had enough. Helena stepped behind Qua, not cowering, just standing close, shoulders set. She's not yours to keep, one of the men added. Nor her children. They'll be sent to the mission house. Emma whimpered softly from behind Helena's skirt. No, Helena said, voice sharp as a snapped branch. You don't get to decide that. Judah sneered. You gave up that right when you laid down with a stranger. Qua's hands curled, but he didn't step forward. Helena did. She took one full step past Qua and looked the men in the eye, her baby in her arms, Emma at her side. Her voice trembled, but her back was straight. I may not have a husband, she said. I may not have land or name or favor. But I have a child who lived because this man didn't turn away. I have a girl who smiles again because this home, his home, is safe. And I have the right to stay. Because he didn't save us to throw us out again. Judah's mouth twisted. This is about sin. About decency. About the law. Qua's voice cut across the porch like thunder. Then let the law remember this. He stepped beside Helena and dropped a bundle at their feet. Inside was a wooden ring, carved from cedar and worn smooth at the edges. We're to be married. She said yes yesterday. Helena's breath caught. She looked at him, but he didn't flinch. You never asked me, she whispered. He turned his eyes on her, dark, certain. Didn't need to. You stayed. The cabin door opened behind them. Martha Crane stood in her boots, arms crossed, eyes fierce. You boys planning to arrest them for being better folk than the lot of you? Judah paled. You've no authority here. No, she said. But I've respect. And that's worth more out here than a badge. She stepped beside Helena and touched her arm gently. A child born into warmth and not shame, that's what matters. Judah shifted his weight, jaw tight. This isn't over. You're right, Qua said. Because now, they've got me. Judah left. So did the deputies. They rode off through slush, spitting curses into the wind. Inside, the cabin felt small again, but not because of fear. Because of closeness. Helena stood there, snow sleeping against her chest, Emma quiet beside her, and Qua just watching. You carved that ring days ago, she said. I did. You didn't know I'd say yes. I did, he said again, voice quiet. She laughed, a broken, beautiful thing, and wiped a tear from her cheek. I'll marry you. And not because I owe you. But because you never asked me to. The wedding was small. Just Martha, Emma, and a sunrise. Qua wore a clean shirt. Helena wore her old dress, mended at the hem. They stood beneath the porch as crows flew overhead, and no words were spoken but the ones they needed. Emma gave the wooden ring. Martha gave her blessing. The rest, they gave each other in silence. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat beside the fire, Snow in her cradle, Emma dreaming in the corner. You never asked about him, Helena said suddenly. Qua didn't look away from the flames. Didn't need to. He wasn't cruel. But he was weak. Left before Emma was born. I spent years waiting for him to come back. Years being angry. You stopped waiting. I did, she said. The day you didn't ask anything from me. The fire popped, casting sparks. Qua reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Outside, the snow began again, not heavy, not cruel. Just enough to remind the land it wasn't done with winter yet. Inside, the fire kept burning. A man who had lived alone now leaned into warmth. A woman who thought she was ruined sat straight-backed, hands calloused but strong. And when the wind howled again, as it always would, it found a home that would not shiver. Because some cabins are built not from logs or stone, but from mercy. From soft words, withheld judgment, and the brave, quiet choice to stay when it would have been easier to run. That's how families are made. And in the Wild West, where storms never waited for permission, a little girl's whisper once saved them all. She just asked the right man to open his door. And he did.